The Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport buzzed with the frenetic energy of a late afternoon rush. Gate 22, tucked in the sprawling Terminal A, was a chaotic symphony of rolling suitcases, hurried footsteps, and the distant hum of jet engines. Overhead, a digital board flashed updates. Flight 319 to Washington, D.C. On time, boarding in progress. Outside, dark clouds loomed on the horizon, promising a brewing storm that had already delayed half a dozen flights across the airport. The air was thick with anticipation, impatience, and the faint smell of coffee from a nearby kiosk. In the midst of the crowd stood a man who seemed untouched by the chaos. Colonel Marcus Hayes, 38, cut an imposing figure in his crisp Army uniform. His dark skin gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and his polished boots reflected the hustle around him. His posture was ramrod straight, shoulders squared, exuding a quiet authority that didn't demand attention but commanded it nonetheless. A black backpack hung from one shoulder, its straps worn but sturdy, a silent testament to years of service. Marcus's face was unreadable, his deep brown eyes fixed on the gate agent as she scanned his first-class ticket for seat 1A. With a small nod, he acknowledged her quick "Thank you, sir," and moved toward the jet bridge, his steps measured, deliberate, and silent. The plane, a sleek Boeing 737, was already half full as Marcus stepped into the first-class cabin. The space was a stark contrast to the cramped economy section behind the curtain-wide leather seats, soft ambient lighting, and a faint scent of lavender from the air vents. Marcus slid his backpack under seat 1A, right by the window, and settled in. His hands folded neatly in his lap, his gaze fixed straight ahead. He didn't pull out a phone or rummage through his bag like the other passengers. He just sat still as stone, a man who knew the value of presence. Around him the cabin slowly filled. A businessman in a tailored gray suit, Michael Reed, 40, took seat 1C across the aisle, his fingers already dancing across a laptop keyboard. A woman in her early 30s, Sarah Gwynn, dressed in a navy blazer and clutching a fashion magazine, settled into 2B. An older couple, Margaret and Robert Evans, both in their mid-60s, fumbled with their carry-ons in row 3, their voices low but laced with the kind of bickering that comes from decades together. The cabin hummed with the usual pre-flight chatter, small talk about delayed connections, the weather, and overpriced airport food. Marcus noticed the glances. They were subtle but unmistakable. Michael Reed's eyes flicked toward his uniform, then quickly back to his screen. Sarah's gaze lingered a moment longer, her lips parting as if to say something before she buried herself in her magazine. A young man in a hoodie, Tyler Brooks, 22, sprawled in 4A, earbuds in, but his head tilted slightly toward Marcus, curious. It wasn't new to Marcus, this quiet scrutiny, the unspoken questions in their eyes. He'd felt it in briefing rooms, on bases, in civilian spaces where his uniform seemed to both demand respect and invite doubt. He ignored it, as always, his focus unwavering. The cabin's rhythm shifted with the sharp click of heels on the carpeted floor. Laura Bennett, 42, the lead flight attendant, stepped into first class with the confidence of someone who owned the space. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun, her navy uniform pressed to perfection, her name tag gleaming under the cabin lights. She moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the rows like a general surveying a battlefield. Laura had worked this route for years, her authority honed by countless flights and countless passengers. She knew how to handle complaints, defuse tantrums, and keep the cabin in line. But today, something in her posture was sharper, more brittle, as if the storm outside had seeped into her mood. Her eyes landed on Marcus and she froze. For a split second her face betrayed a flicker of something: surprise, irritation, maybe both. She stepped forward, her heels clicking louder now, and stopped beside his seat. The cabin seemed to quiet, as if the air itself held its breath. "Sir," Laura said, her voice loud enough to carry to the rows behind, "this seat is reserved for first class." Marcus turned his head slightly, just enough to meet her gaze. His voice was calm, low, and steady. "It is my seat." Laura's lips tightened. "I don't think so," she said, her tone sharpening like a blade. "Let me see your boarding pass." Without a word, Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and handed her the ticket. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, as if he'd done this 100 times before. Laura snatched the pass without a thank you, her eyes scanning it with a quick, dismissive glance. Her brow furrowed and she muttered almost to herself, "This has to be a mistake." "It's not," Marcus said, his voice still even, but with a weight that made the words land harder than they should have. Laura didn't respond immediately. She looked at him again, not at the boarding pass, not at his ID, but at him. Her eyes narrowed and her voice rose, cutting through the cabin like a siren. "You people always think you can get away with anything." The words hung in the air, heavy and jagged. A gasp rippled through the first-class cabin. Michael Reed's fingers froze on his keyboard. Sarah Nguyen's magazine slipped slightly in her hands. Tyler Brooks pulled one earbud out, his eyes wide. The older couple in row 3 exchanged a glance, their bickering silenced. Marcus didn't move. His face remained impassive, but his eyes held Laura's unyielding. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice so calm it seemed to unnerve her further. And then it happened. Laura's hand shot out, an open palm striking Marcus across the face. The slap echoed sharp and shocking like a crack of thunder in the confined space. The cabin went still. Michael Reed's mouth fell open. Sarah Nguyen's magazine dropped to her lap. A woman in Tua whispered, "Did she just?" No one answered. No one moved. The moment felt frozen, as if the plane itself had stopped breathing. Marcus didn't flinch. He blinked once slowly, then rose to his feet. At 6'2", he towered over Laura, but his presence wasn't threatening, it was commanding, deliberate. He bent down, retrieved his backpack, and turned toward the front of the plane. His face showed no pain, no anger, just focus. He walked toward the cockpit door, his steps steady, his boots barely making a sound on the carpet. Laura stood rooted to the spot, her hands still hovering in the air, her eyes wide with a mix of defiance and sudden uncertainty. She hadn't expected this. She'd expected shouting, a scene, something to justify her actions. Instead, Marcus's silence was louder than any outburst could have been. As he reached the cockpit door, a younger flight attendant, Jake Carter, 28, stepped forward, his face flushed with nervous energy. "Sir, you can't go in there," Jake said, his voice loud but unsteady. "Go back to your seat, or I'll call security." Marcus didn't stop. He pulled a small metallic ID card from his pocket and held it up. The card caught the light, its holographic seal glinting. Jake's eyes widened and he hesitated, his hand hovering over the radio clipped to his belt. Before he could say anything else, the cockpit door opened with a soft click. Captain David Nguyen, 50, stood in the doorway, his weathered face calm but alert. When he saw Marcus, his posture straightened, and he gave a small formal nod. "Colonel Hayes," he said, his voice carrying a respect that silenced Jake. "Come in." The first-class passengers shifted in their seats, craning their necks to see. Michael Reed closed his laptop, his eyes darting between Marcus and the cockpit door. Sarah Nguyen leaned forward, whispering to the woman beside her. "Did he just say Colonel?" Tyler Brooks, now fully alert, slipped his phone from his pocket, his thumb hovering over the record button. The older couple in row 3 sat frozen, Margaret's hand clutching Robert's arm. Inside the cockpit, the air was cooler, quieter, the hum of electronics a stark contrast to the tension outside. The co-pilot, Jenna Patel, 34, looked up from her controls, her expression shifting from confusion to recognition as she saw Marcus. He handed Captain Nguyen a small, encrypted case from his backpack. Nguyen opened it with a key card, revealing a secure tablet. He scanned the message displayed, his eyes narrowing slightly. Without a word, he reached for the comm switch. "Ground control, this is Flight 319. Hold our pushback. Repeat, hold our pushback. We have an FA-level concern on board." Back in the cabin, the engine's low hum faded, and the plane, which had just been cleared to taxi, came to a complete stop. The seatbelt sign flicked off with a soft ding. Passengers stirred, confused. A man in row 5 leaned toward the window, muttering, "We're not moving." A woman beside him checked her phone, frowning. "Maybe it's mechanical," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. In first class, Laura had retreated to the galley, her hands trembling as she twisted the cap off a water bottle. Her jaw was set, but her eyes betrayed her she knew something was wrong. She hadn't been called to the cockpit. No update from the captain. No word from the crew. Jake, the younger flight attendant, approached her cautiously, his voice low. "Laura, is everything okay?" She didn't look at him. "Just a delay," she said, her voice tight. "Probably runway traffic." Jake hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the cockpit door. About earlier, the guy in uniform. He wasn't supposed to be in that seat, right? Laura's gaze snapped to him. "He wasn't," she said too quickly. "But he had a ticket," Jake replied, his tone careful. "I saw the seat number. It matched." She glared at him, then forced a smile, her composure cracking. "Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be." Jake nodded but didn't respond. He stepped back, his eyes lingering on her for a moment before he returned to his duties. The cabin was quieter now, the usual pre-flight chatter replaced by an uneasy hush. Passengers exchanged glances, sensing the shift but not fully understanding it. Michael Reed opened his laptop again but didn't type, his fingers hovering over the keys. Sarah Gwynn flipped through her magazine without reading it. Tyler Brooks, still clutching his phone, began typing a post on X. "Flight attendant just slapped a soldier in first class. What the hell is going on?" Flight 319. Outside, the storm clouds grew darker, casting long shadows across the tarmac. The airport crew moved equipment with deliberate slowness, as if they, too, sensed something unusual. Inside, Laura lingered in the galley, rearranging napkins that were already perfectly aligned. Her hands shook slightly, and she avoided looking toward seat 1A, where Marcus had yet to return. She'd seen the way he walked to the cockpit, the way the captain addressed him. She'd heard the word colonel. And now the plane wasn't moving. The realization hit her like a slow, cold wave. This wasn't just a mistake. This was something bigger. A new passenger, Emily Torres, 35, a lawyer traveling with her husband, leaned toward him in row 3A. "She didn't even check his ticket properly," she whispered. "She just assumed he didn't belong. And then she hit him." Her husband, Carlos, nodded, his jaw tight. "That's not just bad service. That's something else." Across the aisle, Margaret Evans, the older woman, clutched her husband's arm tighter. "I've flown this airline for years," she said softly. "I've never seen anything like that." She didn't even ask a question first. Robert, her husband, shook his head. "He's military. You don't just do that to someone in uniform." In row 4, Tyler Brooks hit post on his X update, and within minutes, the notifications began rolling in. His followers, mostly college friends and a few aviation enthusiasts, started retweeting, adding their own shocked emojis and questions. The post gained traction, a small spark in the digital wildfire that was about to ignite. Tyler glanced toward the front of the cabin, his heart racing. He'd never been part of something like this before, a moment that felt bigger than himself. Back in the galley, Laura felt the weight of the silence. She'd always prided herself on control over the cabin, the passengers, the flow of service. But now that control was slipping. She could feel the eyes of the other passengers, even those pretending to read or scroll their phones. She could hear the whispers, though she couldn't make out the words. And she could sense Jake's quiet judgment, his hesitation to meet her gaze. She straightened her uniform, trying to reclaim her authority, but it felt hollow, like a costume that no longer fit. A new layer of tension rippled through the cabin as a mother in row 6, Lila Harper, 29, tried to distract her 2 young sons, who were growing restless. The older boy, Ethan, 8, tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, why did that lady hit the soldier?" he asked, his voice loud enough to carry. Lila shushed him, her face flushing, but the question hung in the air unanswered. Other passengers glanced over, their discomfort growing. The boy's innocent question had cut through the pretense, forcing everyone to confront what they'd witnessed. In the cockpit, Captain Nguyen finished his secure call with FAA command. The voice on the other end was calm but firm. "Colonel Hayes is on a federal security clearance list. The incident has been escalated to a compliance issue under Title VII. The aircraft will remain grounded until a compliance officer boards. Full report required." Nguyen exhaled, his hands resting on the controls. He'd flown through storms, engine failures, and medical emergencies, but this was different. This wasn't about weather or mechanics. This was about a failure of humanity, and it had happened on his flight. He turned to Jenna, the co-pilot. "This isn't going to be a quick fix," he said quietly. Jenna nodded, her eyes on the secure tablet. He didn't even raise his voice, just walked in here and changed everything. Outside, the tarmac crew had stopped moving, their radios crackling with updates. A black SUV with government plates pulled up near the gate, its tinted windows reflecting the darkening sky. Two figures stepped out, one holding a folder, the other with a badge clipped to his jacket. The storm was closer now, the first drops of rain spattering the runway. But inside Flight 319, the real storm was just beginning. Marcus emerged from the cockpit, his face as calm as when he'd entered. He walked back to seat 1A, ignoring the stares, the whispers, the phone subtly angled in his direction. He sat down, folded his hands, and looked straight ahead. The cabin was silent now, but it wasn't the silence of routine. It was the silence of reckoning, the kind that forces you to sit with what you've seen and what you didn't do. Laura, still in the galley, felt her heart pound. She'd made a mistake, but it was more than that. She'd acted on an assumption, a snap judgment that had unraveled in front of an entire cabin. And now the plane wasn't moving. The captain hadn't called her. The crew was avoiding her eyes. And somewhere deep down, she knew that the man in seat 1A had just turned her world upside down without saying a word. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the engines powered down completely. The storm outside grew louder, but inside it was the quiet that spoke. Marcus Hayes sat still, his uniform pristine, his presence undeniable. And in that moment, every passenger, every crew member, knew that this flight was no longer about getting to Washington, D.C. It was about something far bigger, something that would leave no one untouched. The cabin of Flight 319 was a pressure cooker of silence, the kind that amplifies every rustle, every cough, every stolen glance. The engines, once humming with the promise of takeoff, had fallen quiet, leaving only the faint whine of the air conditioning and the distant patter of rain against the fuselage. Outside, the storm clouds over Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport had thickened, casting a gray pall over the tarmac. Inside, the atmosphere was heavier still, charged with the weight of what had just unfolded in first class. Colonel Marcus Hayes, 38, sat motionless in seat 1A, his army uniform pristine, his hands folded, his gaze fixed on the blank wall ahead. The slap from Laura Bennett, the lead flight attendant, still echoed in the minds of every passenger who had witnessed it. And now the plane wasn't moving. In the cockpit, Captain David Nguyen, 50, leaned back in his chair, his fingers resting lightly on the secure headset. The call from FAA Command had just ended, and the words still hung in the air like a verdict. Colonel Hayes is on a federal security clearance list, the voice had said, calm but unyielding. This is a Title VII compliance issue. The aircraft remains grounded until our officer boards. Full report required. Nguyen exhaled, his eyes flicking to the co-pilot, Jenna Patel, 34, who was flipping through the flight log with a tightness in her jaw. This is bigger than I thought, she said, her voice low. Nguyen nodded. It's not just about the slap. It's about what it exposed. Back in the first-class cabin, Laura Bennett stood in the galley, her hands gripping the edge of a counter as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Her blonde bun was still perfect, her uniform still crisp, but her face betrayed hair-off flush of red creeping up her neck, her lips pressed into a thin line. She could feel the eyes of the passengers, even those pretending to be engrossed in their phones or magazines. The younger flight attendant, Jake Carter, 28, hovered nearby, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a nervous energy. He'd seen the whole thing, Laura's snap judgment, the slap, Marcus's eerily calm walk to the cockpit. Laura, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. What's going on? Why aren't we moving? She didn't meet his eyes. It's just a delay, she said, her tone clipped, as if saying it forcefully enough could make it true. Probably air traffic control. You know how it gets with storms. Jake frowned, his hands fidgeting with a tray of water glasses. But that guy, Colonel Hayes, the captain let him into the cockpit like he was in charge. And you, he stopped short, unsure how to finish the sentence without accusing her outright. Laura's gaze snapped to him, sharp and defensive. He wasn't supposed to be in that seat, she said, her voice low but fierce. I was doing my job. Jake hesitated, then pressed on, his voice careful but firm. You saw his boarding pass. It matched. I checked the manifest myself after you know. He swallowed, avoiding the word slapped. It was his seat, Laura. Her jaw tightened and for a moment, it looked like she might snap at him. But then her shoulders sagged and she turned away, busying herself with straightening a stack of napkins that didn't need straightening. Let's not make this a thing, she muttered, but the words lacked conviction. Jake didn't respond. He just nodded and stepped back, his eyes lingering on her for a moment before he moved to check on the passengers. In the cabin, the silence was deafening. Michael Reed, the businessman in 1C, had closed his laptop, his fingers drumming nervously on the armrest. He'd seen the slap, heard Laura's words, "You people always think you can get away with anything," and now he couldn't unsee the way Marcus had stood, calm and unshaken, and walked to the cockpit. "I should have said something," he muttered to himself, his voice so low it was almost inaudible. Across the aisle, Sarah Nguyen, 32, clutched her magazine, her knuckles white. She kept replaying the moment in her head. Laura's hand flashing through the air, the sharp crack, the way Marcus didn't even flinch. Why didn't anyone stop her? She whispered to the woman beside her, who shook her head, eyes wide with discomfort. Tyler Brooks, the 22-year-old in 4A, was no longer listening to his music. His earbuds hung loosely around his neck as he typed furiously on his phone, his ex-post already gaining traction. Flight attendant just slapped a soldier in first class. What the hell is going on? Flight 319. The post had been retweeted dozens of times in minutes, with comments flooding in. Are you serious? That's insane. Was he causing trouble? Post a video. Tyler's heart raced. He hadn't recorded the slap itself, he'd been too stunned, but he'd caught the aftermath. Marcus walking to the cockpit, the captain opening the door, the stunned silence of the cabin. He hesitated, his thumb hovering over the video file. Should he post it? It felt like crossing a line, but the injustice of what he'd seen burned in his chest. He hit upload, adding a caption. This is what happened after a flight attendant slapped a black soldier for no reason. Planes grounded now. Flight 319. In row 3, Margaret Evans, 65, leaned toward her husband, Robert, her voice trembling with indignation. I've flown this airline for decades and I've never seen anything like that, she said. She didn't even ask him a question first. Just hit him. Robert, a retired mechanic with a weathered face, nodded slowly. He's military. You don't do that to a man in uniform. Not like that. Margaret's hands twisted in her lap. We should have said something, Robert. We just sat here. The older couple's conversation was interrupted by a new voice, sharp and commanding, from the cockpit door. Captain Nguyen stepped into the aisle, his face composed but his eyes hard. Lead flight attendant to the cockpit, please, he said over the intercom, his voice carrying a weight that made every passenger sit up straighter. Laura froze in the galley, her hands clenching the counter. For a moment she didn't move, as if hoping the call wasn't for her. But the silence in the cabin was suffocating, and she could feel every eye on her. She smoothed her uniform, took a deep breath and walked toward the cockpit, her heels clicking unevenly now, each step heavier than the last. Inside the cockpit, Nguyen didn't look up immediately. He was reviewing the secure tablet Marcus had given him, its screen displaying a classified message from FAA command. Jenna, the co-pilot, sat silently, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes flicking between Nguyen and the door. When Laura entered, the door closed behind her with a soft thud. Nguyen finally looked up, his expression unreadable. We've received a formal notice from FAA operations, he said, his voice flat. They're aware of an incident involving a passenger in uniform. You, Ms. Bennett, are the crew member involved. Laura's lips parted, but no sound came out at first. I was following procedure, she said, her voice cracking slightly. I thought he... You struck him. Nguyen cut her off, his tone like a blade. You didn't verify his boarding pass with the manifest. You didn't follow protocol. You acted on assumption. Laura flinched, her hands clenching at her sides. I reacted. I thought he was in the wrong seat. Did you scan his ticket? Nguyen asked, his eyes narrowing. I looked at it, she said quickly. Did you verify it with the manifest? She hesitated, her throat tightening. No, but... Nguyen shook his head, cutting her off again. That man is a colonel with a federal security clearance. You put your hands on an active duty officer, And now the FAA is grounding this flight until a full investigation takes place. Laura's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The headset on the control panel buzzed, and Gwyn handed it to her without breaking eye contact. "This is Officer Daniels, FAA Enforcement Division," a calm, authoritative voice said. "We've been notified of a physical assault against an active duty officer on board Flight 319. Are you the crew member involved?" Laura's voice was barely audible. "Yes. You are to escort the passenger back to his original seat immediately," Daniels continued. "You will deliver a clear verbal apology in front of witnesses, and you are not to speak with him again. FAA agents will meet this flight upon landing. Do you understand?" Her voice cracked. "Yes." The line went dead. Laura lowered the headset, her hands clammy, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure Gwyn could hear it. He said nothing more, just gestured toward the door. Laura stepped out of the cockpit, her legs unsteady, her mind racing. The cabin was a sea of faces, all watching her, some openly, some pretending not to. Marcus sat in 1A, his posture unchanged, his eyes forward. He hadn't moved an inch since returning from the cockpit, but his presence filled the space like a storm cloud. Laura stood at the front of the cabin, her hands trembling just enough to notice. She could feel the weight of every gaze, even those hidden behind phones or magazines. Her throat felt tight, her thoughts scattered. For a moment she just stood there frozen, then slowly began walking toward Marcus's seat. Her heels, once sharp and confident, now sounded tentative, almost apologetic. She stopped beside him, her voice dry and strained. "I'd like to apologize," she said, the words sounding rehearsed, hollow. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding about your seat." Marcus looked up, his gaze calm but piercing, cutting through her like glass. "A misunderstanding," he repeated, his voice low but resonant, carrying to the rows behind. "You saw my boarding pass. You saw the seat number. And you still slapped me." Her breath caught. The cabin felt like it had stopped breathing. Michael Reed shifted uncomfortably in 1C, his eyes fixed on his closed laptop. Saren Wynn's magazine slipped to the floor, unnoticed. Tyler Brooks, his phone still in hand, started recording again, his hands shaking slightly. Laura's face flushed, and she tried to steady her voice. "I shouldn't have reacted the way I did," she said, her tone wavering between fear and forced composure. "It was a mistake in judgment." Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You looked at my face and decided I didn't belong here," he said, his words simple but heavy. "That's not a mistake. That's a choice." Laura swallowed hard, her jaw tightening. The apology she was trying to deliver wasn't one she'd ever had to give, and it cut deeper than she expected. "I assumed you didn't belong in first class," she said, her voice barely audible. "Because of how you looked." The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't just her words, it was the truth they carried. A truth that felt all too familiar to Marcus and to others who had faced the same assumptions. Passengers shifted in their seats, some looking away, others staring openly now. Margaret Evans in row 3 whispered to her husband, "She just admitted it." Robert nodded, his face grim. "She didn't even try to deny it." Marcus gave a small nod, not of approval but of acknowledgement. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady. "Now go do your job." Laura turned without another word, her face burning. She walked back to the galley, her steps quick and nervous, as if she could escape the weight of what she'd just said. But she couldn't. The cabin had heard everything, and the air had changed. It wasn't just about a delay, Anna Marie, it was about a moment that had exposed something raw, something ugly, and no one could unsee it. Tyler's video, now uploaded to X, was exploding online. The clip, just 30 seconds long, showed Laura's halting apology, Marcus's calm response, and the stunned faces of the passengers around them. The caption read, "Flight attendant forced to apologize after slapping a black soldier. Plane still grounded. Flight 319 justice within minutes." It had thousands of retweets, with comments ranging from outrage to disbelief. "She slapped him because of how he looked? This is why I record everything on flights now. That soldier is a hero for staying so calm." Tyler stared at his phone, his hands trembling with adrenaline. He hadn't meant to start a movement, but that's exactly what was happening. In row 6, Lila Harper, the mother with 2 young sons, was struggling to keep them calm. Ethan, her 8-year-old, tugged at her sleeve again. "Mom, why did she say that? Why did she think he didn't belong?" Lila's face softened, but her eyes were heavy with guilt. "Some people make mistakes about others, honey," she said, her voice low. "They judge before they know." Ethan frowned, not fully understanding, but his younger brother, Liam 5, piped up. "That's not fair." Lila nodded, her throat tight. "No, it's not." The boy's words carried, and a few passengers nearby turned their heads. The simplicity of a child's observation cut through the adult justifications, the polite silences, the averted gazes. Sarah Gwynn in 2B leaned forward slightly, her voice barely audible. "I saw it happen," she said to the woman beside her. "I should have said something. I just froze." The woman, a college professor named Dr. Anita Coleman, 45, nodded slowly. "We all did," she said. "That's what makes this so hard to sit with. We watched it happen and did nothing." The cabin was a mosaic of guilt and realization now. Michael Reed, the businessman, opened his laptop again, but instead of working, he started typing a note to himself. "Next time, speak up. Don't wait for someone else to do it." In row 5, a young couple, Chris and Emily Donovan, both in their early 30s, whispered heatedly. "She had no right," Chris said, his voice low but angry. "She didn't even check his ticket properly. She just assumed." Emily nodded, her eyes on Marcus. "He didn't even raise his voice. That's what gets me. He could have made a scene, but he didn't. He just made them face it." Outside, the rain was falling harder now, drumming against the plane's exterior. The black SUV with government plates was still parked near the gate, its occupants waiting for clearance to board. Inside, the tension was palpable. Jake, the younger flight attendant, moved through the cabin, offering water to passengers but avoiding eye contact with Laura. He could feel the shift in the crew dynamic. She was no longer the unquestioned leader. Her authority, once absolute, had crumbled in minutes. Laura, back in the galley, was unraveling. She stood with her arms crossed, staring at the floor, her mind replaying the moment her hand met Marcus's face. She'd acted on instinct, on a gut feeling that he didn't belong in first class. And now that instinct had betrayed her. She could hear the whispers from the cabin, the soft clinks of glasses as Jake served drinks, the faint buzz of phones as passengers texted or posted about the incident. She wanted to scream, to defend herself, to say she was just doing her job. But deep down she knew that wasn't true. She'd made a choice and now she was paying for it. In the cockpit, Gwyn and Jenna were reviewing the latest directive from FAA Command. "They're sending a compliance officer," Gwyn said, his voice tight. "They want a full passenger log, every interaction documented. This isn't just about her anymore. It's about the airline, the crew, the whole system." Jenna shook her head, her eyes on the controls. She didn't know who he was. But that's the point, isn't it? She didn't care enough to find out. Gwyn nodded. "And now we're all sitting here because of it." Back in the cabin, a new voice broke the silence. Margaret Evans, the older woman in row 3, stood up, her hands trembling with indignation. "This is unacceptable," she said, her voice loud enough to carry through first class. "I've flown this airline for years, and I've never seen a crew member strike a passenger. A soldier, no less. I want to file a complaint when we land." Her words sparked a ripple of agreement. Chris Donovan in row 5 nodded vigorously. "She should be fired," he said, his voice rising. "You don't get to hit someone and just walk away." Emily, his wife, put a hand on his arm, but her eyes were fierce. She didn't just hit him. She humiliated him in front of everyone. And for what? Because he's black. The word hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, some nodding, others looking away. The truth was out now, spoken aloud, and it changed the cabin's atmosphere. Laura, still in the galley, heard the accusations and felt her stomach twist. She wanted to step out to explain herself, but Jake's presence stopped her. He was standing near the curtain, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. He didn't say anything, but his silence was louder than any reprimand. Tyler's phone buzzed incessantly now, the notifications piling up. His video had gone viral with over 10,000 retweets and counting. News outlets were starting to pick up the story, with headlines like Flight Attendant Slaps Military Officer, Plane Grounded appearing on smaller aviation blogs. Tyler's hand shook as he read the comments, some praising Marcus's composure, others demanding Laura's termination. He felt a strange mix of pride and guilt, pride for exposing the truth, guilt for not speaking up in the moment. In row 6, Lila's son Ethan spoke again, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Mom, is the plane stopped because of that lady?" Lila hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, honey. She made a big mistake, and now they have to fix it." Ethan frowned, his young mind grappling with the weight of it. But why did she think he didn't belong? Lila's eyes stung with tears she didn't let fall. "Sometimes people make wrong choices about others," she said softly. But he showed them they were wrong. The cabin was alive now with quiet conversations, each passenger wrestling with their own role in the moment. Some felt shame for their silence, others anger at Laura's actions. Marcus, still in 1A, remained a silent anchor, his presence commanding without effort. He could hear the whispers, feel the eyes on him, but he didn't react. He didn't need to. The truth was doing the talking for him. In the galley, Laura's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her hands shaking, and saw a text from a colleague on another flight. "Laura, what happened? People are saying you hit a passenger. It's all over X." Her heart sank. She opened the app and saw Tyler's video, the comments piling up like a tidal wave. Her face, her voice, her apology, all of it was out there now, exposed to the world. She turned off her phone, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped it. Outside, the rain had turned into a downpour, the storm now in full force. The black SUV remained parked near the gate, its occupants waiting for clearance to board. Inside, the cabin was a microcosm of reckoning passengers, crew, and even Laura herself grappling with the fallout of a single moment. Marcus sat still, his backpack tucked neatly under his seat, his eyes on the window now, watching the rain streak across the glass. He hadn't spoken more than a dozen words since the incident began, but his silence was louder than any speech. It was forcing everyone around him to confront not just what had happened, but why and what it meant for them all. The cabin of Flight 319 was a crucible of tension, the air thick with the weight of what had transpired. The engines remained silent, the plane still tethered to the gate at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport as rain lashed the windows, the storm outside mirroring the one within. Colonel Marcus Hayes, 38, sat in seat 1A, his army uniform a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded around him. His face was unreadable, his hands folded calmly in his lap, but his presence was a quiet storm, commanding the attention of every passenger without a single word. Laura Bennett, the lead flight attendant who had slapped him, had retreated to the rear galley, her authority shattered, her hands trembling as she awaited the consequences of her actions. The cabin was a mosaic of whispers, guilt, and uneasy glances, as passengers grappled with what they had witnessed and what they had failed to do. The metallic click of the boarding door unlatching cut through the silence like a gunshot. Heads turned, phones lowered, and eyes widened as two figures stepped onto the plane. The first was Officer Rachel Carter, 45, in a sharp black FA uniform, her face composed but stern, her badge catching the cabin's dim light. Beside her was Special Agent Kevin Patel, 38, in a dark blue suit, a badge clipped to his belt and a small folder tucked under his arm. Their presence was unmistakable federal authority in motion, deliberate and unyielding. They moved past the first few rows, their eyes scanning the cabin with purpose. Passengers straightened in their seats, some instinctively tucking away their phones, others staring openly, as if witnessing the opening act of a courtroom drama. Rachel Carter stopped at the front row, her gaze settling on Marcus. "Colonel Hayes?" she asked, her tone firm but respectful. Marcus nodded once, his eyes meeting hers. "Yes. I'm Officer Carter, Federal Aviation Authority, with the Department of Aviation Oversight," she said. "This is Special Agent Patel. We'll be escorting you off the aircraft last per protocol. Is that understood?" "Understood," Marcus replied, his voice steady, betraying no emotion. Patel spoke next, his voice low but clear. "We'll also be detaining a crew member for formal questioning. She will be removed first. We ask that you remain in your seat until the aircraft is cleared." Marcus gave another nod, and the two agents turned, their footsteps deliberate as they made their way toward the rear galley. The cabin was electric now, every passenger's attention locked on the unfolding scene. Michael Reed, the businessman in 1C, leaned forward slightly, his laptop forgotten. Sarah Gwynn in 2B, clutched her magazine, her knuckles white. Tyler Brooks, the 22-year-old in 4A, had his phone angled discreetly, recording the agent's approach, his heart pounding as his video continued to rack up views on X. The older couple, Margaret and Robert Evans in row 3, exchanged a glance, Margaret's hand tightening on her husband's arm. "This is it," she whispered. "She's done for." In the rear galley, Laura Bennett heard the footsteps before she saw the agents. Her body tensed, her breath shallow as she stood from the jump seat, her hands pressed to her sides. Her uniform, once a symbol of control, now felt like a target. When Carter and Patel appeared, their faces impassive, Laura's mouth opened slightly as if to speak, but no words came. "Miss Bennett," Carter said, her voice steady, "you are to step off the aircraft now. You'll be escorted to a private room for immediate questioning." Laura nodded faintly, her lips pale. She glanced at Jake Carter, the younger flight attendant who stood nearby, his face unreadable. She wanted to say something to him, to the agents, to anyone, but his silence stopped her. Jake stepped aside, his eyes fixed on the floor, and the gesture felt like a final severance of their professional bond. Laura turned and walked up the aisle, her steps slow, each one heavier than the last. The cabin watched in silence, no cheers, no jeers, just a devastating quiet that clung to her like a shadow. As she passed row 1, she made the mistake of glancing at Marcus. He looked up, meeting her eyes for a fleeting moment, his gaze not angry but disappointed, a look that cut deeper than any shout could. Laura's eyes dropped and she kept walking, the weight of her actions pressing down with every step. When she reached the jet bridge, the door closed behind her with a pressurized hiss. The sound echoed through the cabin, final and unyielding. A man in row 5 whispered to his seatmate, "That's why we're still here." His seatmate, a woman in her 40s, nodded slowly. She just ended her career. Marcus remained in 1A, his posture unchanged, his backpack still tucked neatly beneath the seat. He didn't react to Laura's departure, didn't acknowledge the whispers or the stares. His calm was a force, a silent rebuke to the chaos that had erupted around him. But the cabin was no longer just a collection of passengers, it was a courtroom, and everyone on board had become a witness, whether they wanted to or not. In row 6, Lila Harper, 29, held her son Ethan's hand as he stared wide-eyed toward the front. "Mom, are they taking her away because she hit him?" he asked, his voice carrying in the quiet cabin. Lila nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, honey. She made a big mistake, and now she has to face the consequences." Ethan's younger brother, Liam 5, piped up. "But he didn't do anything wrong." Lila's eyes stung and she squeezed their hands. "No, he didn't. That's why this matters." The boy's words rippled through the cabin, a child's clarity slicing through the adult discomfort. Sarah Gwynn in 2B turned to Dr. Anita Coleman, the professor beside her. "I keep thinking about what I didn't do," she said softly. "I saw her slap him and I just sat here. I should have said something." Anita nodded, her expression heavy. "We all should have," she said. "That's what's eating at me. We let it happen." Across the aisle, Michael Reed opened his laptop again, but instead of working, he typed a single line in a blank document. "Silence is complicity." He stared at the words, then closed the laptop, his hands shaking slightly. In row 5, Chris Donovan, 30, couldn't hold back any longer. He stood up, his voice loud and raw. "This is bullshit," he said, drawing every eye in the cabin. "She hit a soldier for no reason, and we're all just sitting here like it's normal? She should be fired right now." His wife, Emily, tugged at his sleeve, but her eyes were fierce. "Chris, sit down," she said, but her voice carried the same anger. "He's right though," she added, loud enough for others to hear. "She didn't just make a mistake. She targeted him. And we let it happen." The outburst sparked a wave of murmurs, some passengers nodding in agreement, others shifting uncomfortably. Jake, the younger flight attendant, stepped forward, his hands raised in a calming gesture. "Please everyone stay seated," he said, his voice strained. "We're handling this. The captain will update you soon." But the passengers weren't so easily placated. Margaret Evans stood now, her voice trembling but firm. "Handling it," she said. "You call that handling it?" She struck a man in uniform and no one stopped her. "I've flown this airline for 40 years, and I've never been so ashamed." The cabin erupted in a low hum of agreement, voices overlapping. "She should be arrested," a man in row 7 called out. "What kind of airline lets this happen?" a woman in row 8 added. Jake looked overwhelmed, his eyes darting toward the cockpit, hoping for backup. Captain Wynn's voice came over the intercom, calm but commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated and calm. We're addressing a compliance issue, and we'll update you shortly. Thank you for your patience." The announcement did little to quell the unrest. Tyler Brooks, still filming, posted another update to X. "FAA just boarded the plane and took the flight attendant away. This is wild." Flight 319, the post exploded, with thousands of retweets and comments pouring in. "Good. She deserves it. That soldier's a badass for staying so calm. This is why airlines need better training." Tyler's phone buzzed nonstop, the notifications a constant reminder of the moment's wait. In the cockpit, Gwen and Jenna reviewed the latest FAA directive. "They're treating this as a priority-level compliance failure," Gwen said, his voice low. "Every interaction has to be documented. Passenger statements, crew logs, everything." Jenna shook her head, her eyes on the secure tablet. "She didn't just break protocol. She broke trust. And now we're all paying for it." Gwen nodded, his jaw tight. "The compliance officer is already with Ms. Bennett. They're not wasting time." Outside, in a private room near the gate, Laura sat at a metal table, her uniform jacket draped over the chair beside her. Officer Carter sat across from her, a legal pad in front of her, while Agent Patel stood by the door, his arms crossed. The room was stark, lit by harsh fluorescent lights, the only sound the faint hum of the airport beyond the walls. Carter's voice was calm but unyielding. "For the record, Ms. Bennett, you confirm that you approached the passenger in seat 1A without a directive from the crew manifest or any report from another crew member?" Laura's voice was barely audible. "Yes." "And your reason for approaching him was?" Carter pressed, her pen poised. Laura hesitated, her throat moving as if swallowing something sharp. "I didn't recognize him. I assumed he wasn't supposed to be there." "Did he show you a boarding pass?" Carter asked. "Yes," Laura said, her voice shaking. "Did you scan it?" "No." Carter leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. "What about him made you think he didn't belong?" Laura froze, the question hanging in the air like a guillotine. Her hands clenched on the tabletop, her knuckles white. "He didn't look like someone who flew first class," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. Carter's pen moved across the pad, the scratch of ink on paper the only sound in the room. "Thank you," she said flatly, her tone devoid of warmth. Laura wanted to explain, to justify, but every defense she'd rehearsed crumbled under the weight of her own words. She'd admitted it, out loud, to a federal officer. There was no going back. Back in the cabin, the passengers were restless, the silence broken by pockets of conversation. In row 6, Lila Harper's son Ethan spoke again, his voice clear and piercing. "Mom, is the soldier going to be okay?" Lila nodded, her eyes damp. "He's going to be fine, sweetie. He's stronger than all of us." In row 3, Margaret Evans turned to her husband, her voice low but firm. "We need to write to the airline," she said. "This can't just be swept under the rug." Robert nodded, his face grim. He didn't even raise his voice. "That's what gets me. He could have torn this place apart and he didn't." In row 4, Tyler Brooks was glued to his phone, watching the views on his video climb into the tens of thousands. A news outlet had already messaged him, asking for permission to use the clip. He hesitated, then typed a response. "Go ahead, but make sure you tell the whole story. This wasn't just a slap. It was about who he is." He hit send, his hands still shaking with the adrenaline of being part of something bigger than himself. In row 5, Chris Donovan was still fuming, his voice low but intense as he spoke to Emily. "I can't believe we just sat here. We watched her hit him and we did nothing." Emily nodded, her eyes on Marcus. "He didn't need us to fight for him. He fought his own way. But we should have at least said something." The cabin was a tapestry of regret now, each passenger wrestling with their own silence. Dr. Anita Coleman in 2B opened her notebook and wrote a single line. Courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's sitting still. She closed the notebook, her hands steady but her heart heavy. She'd spent years teaching about systemic bias, but seeing it unfold in real time, and doing nothing, felt like a betrayal of everything she stood for. In the rear galley, Jake stood alone, his arms crossed, his eyes flicking toward the front of the cabin. Laura's absence was palpable, a void that shifted the crew's dynamic. He'd always looked up to her, her confidence, her control. But now, he saw her differently, not as a leader, but as someone who'd let her biases override her judgment. He pulled out a checklist, pretending to review it, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept replaying Marcus's walk to the cockpit, the captain's respectful nod, the way the entire plane had stopped because of one man's quiet resolve. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the black SUV remained parked near the gate, its occupants now joined by a third figure, an airline official with a clipboard, reviewing the passenger manifest. The storm might have been passing, but the consequences were just beginning. Inside, the cabin lights flickered slightly, and the passengers waited, their impatience replaced by a strange sense of anticipation. This wasn't just a delay, Anna Marie, it was a reckoning, and no one could pretend otherwise. Marcus sat in 1A, his gaze now on the window, watching the rain streak across the glass. He hadn't spoken since his exchange with Laura, but his silence was a presence, a force that reshaped the cabin around him. He could hear the whispers, feel the eyes, sense the guilt. But he didn't acknowledge them. This wasn't about spectacle or validation. It was about truth, and the truth was doing the talking for him. In row 7, a new voice emerged, soft but clear. Robert Ellis, 60, a retired Marine with a weathered face and a faded tattoo on his forearm, leaned forward. I served too, he said, his voice carrying to Marcus. I'm sorry you had to go through that, sir. You handled it better than most would have. Marcus turned slightly, meeting the man's eyes. He gave a small nod, not of gratitude but of acknowledgement. Thank you, he said simply, then turned back to the window. The gesture was enough, a quiet connection between two men who understood the weight of a uniform, and the weight of being questioned despite it. The cabin fell silent again. But it was a different kind of silence now, not awkward or tense, but heavy with meaning. The passengers were no longer just waiting for takeoff. They were waiting for clarity, for resolution, for something to make sense of what they'd seen. And in that silence Marcus Hayes sat, a man who had stopped a plane not with force, but with the unyielding power of his presence. The rain had softened to a faint drizzle, its gentle patter against the windows of Flight 319 barely audible in the now silent cabin. After nearly 2 hours of being grounded at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, the Boeing 737's engines hummed back to life, a low rumble that signaled the end of the standoff but not the end of the story. The seatbelt sign flickered on with a soft ding, and the passengers, still reeling from the events, buckled up in a daze. Colonel Marcus Hayes, 38, sat in seat 1A, his Army uniform as pristine as when he'd boarded, his face as unreadable as ever. The weight of his presence lingered, a quiet force that had reshaped the flight, the crew, and every passenger on board. Laura Bennett, the lead flight attendant who had slapped him, was gone, escorted off the plane by FA agents, her career unraveling in real time. The cabin was no longer just a plane. It was a stage where a single moment had exposed truths too raw to ignore. Captain David Nguyen's voice crackled over the intercom, steady but tinged with fatigue. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been cleared for departure. We apologize for the delay and appreciate your patience. Please remain seated as we prepare for takeoff. The announcement was met with a murmur of relief, but it was subdued, overshadowed by the weight of what had transpired. Passengers exchanged glances, their faces a mix of exhaustion, guilt, and quiet awe. No one spoke of destinations or connecting flights now. They spoke of Marcus, of Laura, of the slap that had stopped a plane. As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, Marcus gazed out the window, watching the rain-slicked tarmac blur past. His hands remained folded, his posture unchanged, but his mind was elsewhere in the countless times he'd faced similar assumptions, similar judgments, and chosen silence as his weapon. He'd learned long ago that words could be twisted, but actions, when deliberate, spoke louder. Today, his silence had grounded a flight, forced an apology, and sparked a reckoning. He didn't revel in it. He didn't need to. The truth had done the work. In row 3, Margaret Evans, 65, leaned toward her husband, Robert, her voice low but resolute. "We're writing to the airline when we land," she said, her hands twisting a tissue. "This can't just be a story we tell at dinner. It has to mean something." Robert nodded, his weathered face set. "He didn't even raise his voice, Margaret. That's what stays with me. He didn't need to." In row 6, Lila Harper, 29, held her sons close, their small bodies pressed against her as the plane picked up speed. Ethan, 8, looked up at her, his eyes wide. "Mom, is the soldier okay now?" Lila smiled, though her throat tightened. "He's okay, honey. He's stronger than most people I've ever seen." Liam, 5, piped up. "Will the lady get in trouble?" Lila hesitated, then nodded. "She already is, sweetheart. Sometimes when you do something wrong, it follows you." In row 4, Tyler Brooks, 22, stared at his phone, the screen glowing with notifications. His video of Laura's apology and Marcus's response had exploded online, now at over 50,000 retweets and climbing. News outlets CNN, NBC, even local stations had picked up the story, their headlines screaming, "Flight attendant slaps black soldier, plane grounded by FAA." Tyler's inbox was flooded with messages from reporters, aviation bloggers, and strangers demanding more details. He'd become an accidental catalyst, his impulsive post igniting a firestorm. But as the plane lifted off, he felt a pang of unease. "I didn't do enough," he muttered to himself, his thumb hovering over the screen. "I recorded it, but I didn't stop it." Across the aisle, Sarah Nguyen, 32, sat with her magazine unopened, her eyes fixed on the back of Marcus's seat. She'd replayed the moment of the slap 100 times in her mind, each loop sharpening her guilt. "I should have spoken up," she whispered to Dr. Anita Coleman, the professor beside her. Anita nodded, her expression heavy. "We all should have," she said. "But he didn't need us to. That's what makes this so powerful and so painful." In row 5, Chris Donovan, 30, was still simmering, his hands clenched on the armrests. "They better fire her," he said to his wife, Emily, his voice low but intense. "You don't get to hit someone and walk away like it's nothing." Emily nodded, her eyes fierce. "It's not just about her. It's about what she thought she could get away with. And we let it happen by sitting here." The plane climbed through the storm clouds, the cabin shaking slightly with turbulence, but the passengers barely noticed. Their minds were elsewhere, tangled in the moral weight of the moment. Jake Carter, the younger flight attendant, moved through the cabin, his usual charm replaced by a quiet efficiency. He avoided the galley where Laura had stood, as if her absence had left a stain he couldn't face. He'd always admired her confidence, her control, but now he saw her differently, a cautionary tale of what happens when you let bias override reason. As the plane leveled off, Captain Nguyen dimmed the cabin lights, signaling the start of the in-flight service. But the mood was far from routine. Passengers sipped their drinks in silence, their conversations hushed, their phones buzzing with updates about the incident. Tyler's video had gone fully viral now, with over 1 million views and counting. Hashtags like Flight 319 and Justice for the Colonel trended on X, sparking debates about race, privilege, and accountability. A local news anchor tweeted, "This incident on Flight 319 is a wake-up call for the airline industry. No one should face assault for existing in a space they rightfully occupy." Back on the ground in a Stark Airport office, Laura Bennett sat across from Officer Rachel Carter and Special Agent Kevin Patel. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on her pale face. Her uniform jacket lay crumpled on the table, a symbol of an authority she no longer held. Carter's voice was steady, methodical. "You've confirmed that you struck Colonel Hayes without verifying his ticket against the manifest," she said, her pen moving across her legal pad. "You've also stated that your actions were based on an assumption about his appearance. Is that correct?" Laura's voice was barely audible. "Yes." Patel leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Did you receive any prior complaints about Colonel Hayes from other passengers or crew?" "No," Laura said, her hands trembling in her lap. Then why did you approach him? Carter asked, her tone unrelenting. Laura's throat tightened, her words coming out in a rush. I thought he didn't belong. He didn't look like someone who'd be in first class. I made a mistake. Carter's pen paused, her eyes locking onto Laura's. A mistake is forgetting a drink order, Ms. Bennett. You assaulted a federal officer on active duty. That's a choice with consequences. Laura's eyes dropped to the table, her breath shallow. She wanted to argue, to explain the stress of the day, the storm delays, the pressure of the job. But every excuse felt hollow in the face of Carter's unflinching gaze. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You're suspended pending a full investigation, Patel said, his tone clipped. The airline will be notified, and you'll be required to provide a written statement. The FAA will determine further action, which may include federal charges. Laura nodded faintly, her world collapsing in slow motion. She'd spent 15 years climbing the ranks, earning her stripes as lead flight attendant. Now it was all slipping away, undone by a single moment of unchecked bias. Back on the plane, the flight to Washington, D.C. continued, but the cabin felt different. The usual chatter of travel plans and small talk had been replaced by a quiet introspection. In row 7, Robert Ellis, the retired Marine, leaned forward again, his voice soft but clear. Colonel, he said, addressing Marcus directly, I just want you to know you've got my respect. I've been where you are, and I know it's not easy to stay calm like that. Marcus turned slightly, meeting the older man's eyes. Appreciate it, he said simply, his voice steady. The exchange was brief, but it carried a weight that rippled through the cabin, a reminder of the unspoken bond between those who serve and those who understand the cost. In row 2, Dr. Anita Coleman opened her notebook again, jotting down a new thought. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet refusal to be erased. She closed the notebook, her hands steady now, resolved to carry this moment into her teaching, her writing, her life. When the plane landed at Reagan National Airport, the passengers disembarked in near silence, their usual rush replaced by a deliberate slowness. Many paused as they passed Marcus's seat, offering small nods or murmured words of support. Thank you, one woman said softly. I'm sorry, another whispered. Marcus acknowledged each with a nod, his face still calm, his eyes still forward. He waited until the cabin was nearly empty before standing, retrieving his backpack and stepping into the aisle. At the gate, Officer Carter and Agent Patel were waiting, their expressions professional but warm. Colonel Hayes, Carter said, we'll need a brief statement from you before you leave. It won't take long. Marcus nodded. I'll give you what you need, he said. But I'm not here to make a spectacle. I just wanted my seat. Carter's eyes softened slightly, a rare crack in her professional demeanor. Understood, she said. Your actions spoke louder than any spectacle could. As Marcus followed the agents to a private room, the other passengers dispersed, their phones buzzing with updates. Tyler's video had now reached over 2 million views, with news outlets broadcasting it on evening segments. The airline issued a statement, posted to X and their website. We deeply regret the incident on Flight 319 and have suspended the crew member involved. We are cooperating fully with the FAA and conducting an internal review to ensure this never happens again. The statement was met with a flood of responses, some praising the airline's swift action, others demanding systemic change. In the days that followed, the story grew legs. Marcus declined media interviews, but his name became a symbol of quiet resilience. The hashtag Justice for the Colonel trended for a week, with op-eds and think pieces dissecting the incident's implications. Aviation blogs reported that the airline had launched a mandatory training program on bias and passenger rights, with Flight 319 as a case study. A mural appeared at a Texas flight school, depicting a plane grounded under a stormy sky with the words, "He sat. We stood." Laura, now back in her Dallas apartment, sat alone, her phone off to avoid the barrage of notifications. 6 months later, she wrote a letter to an internal airline forum, her words raw and unpolished. I made a choice based on what I thought I knew. I was wrong, and I'll carry that for the rest of my life. If my mistake helps others learn, then maybe there's some good in it. The letter was leaked online, sparking a new wave of debate. Some saw it as genuine remorse, others as too little too late. Marcus, meanwhile, returned to his duties, his life unchanged on the surface. But a month after the incident, he accepted an invitation to speak at an aviation academy in Atlanta. Standing before a room of young trainees, he spoke quietly, his voice carrying the same calm authority that had stopped a plane. "Silence isn't weakness," he said. "It's a choice. Sometimes, it's the only way to make people hear what they've been ignoring." A student asked, "What if they don't listen?" Marcus smiled faintly, the first time anyone had seen him do so. "Then you let the consequences speak." The story of Flight 319 became more than a news cycle. It became a mirror forcing passengers, crew, and the industry to confront their own biases, their own silences. For Marcus, it was just another day of navigating a world that often questioned his place in it. But for those who witnessed it, it was a lesson in the power of standing firm not with fists, but with the unyielding strength of being undeniably, unapologetically present. Ladies and gentlemen, fasten your seatbelts, because the story of Flight 319 isn't just a wild ride at 30,000 feet, it's a turbulence-filled lesson that hits closer to home than your overpriced airport coffee. Picture this. You're on a plane minding your own business, maybe scrolling through your phone or pretending to read the in-flight magazine, when bam, a moment of injustice unfolds right in front of you. Do you speak up? Or do you stay silent, hoping someone else will handle it? Colonel Marcus Hayes showed us that sometimes the loudest statement is made without saying a word. His cool-headed response didn't just ground a plane. It grounded all of us in a reality check about assumptions, privilege, and the power of staying true to who you are. This story isn't stuck in 2025, it's a mirror for today's world, where snap judgments can spread faster than a viral TikTok. Whether it's at work, on the subway, or even in your group chat, we've all seen moments where someone's judged not for what they do but for how they look. And let's be real, we've all had our Laura Bennett moments, where we've made a call based on a gut feeling that turned out to be more gut punch than gut instinct. The lesson? Pause, check your facts, and maybe don't slap anyone unless it's a mosquito, and even then make sure it's not just a really tiny drone. Here's the kicker. Marcus didn't need to yell or throw a tantrum to make his point. He let the system and Laura's own actions do the talking. In a world where everyone's shouting to be heard, there's something downright superheroic about using silence like a superpower. It's like he was saying, "Go ahead, underestimate me. I'll just sit here and let the universe serve you a slice of humble pie." So, next time you're tempted to judge someone before you know their story, channel your inner Marcus Hayes. Take a breath, check your boarding pass or your biases, and choose dignity over drama. Now let's get real with each other. Have you ever witnessed a moment like this where someone was treated unfairly, and you didn't know whether to step in or stay quiet? Maybe it was at a coffee shop, a meeting, or even a family dinner where Aunt Karen started ranting about those people. What did you do? What would you do differently now? Drop your story in the comments below. I'm dying to hear how you'd handle your own Flight 319 moment. And while you're at it, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. Our channel's got more stories like this, packed with heart, humor, and lessons that'll stick with you longer than that time you got stuck in airport security. Let's keep the conversation flying. See you in the next one.